I want to thank you all for coming out tonight to learn more about what we at the city believe is really one of the most exciting opportunities for our community from a community perspective, and from an economic development perspective, we think it's one of the great opportunities anywhere in the country. We're here tonight to do a little bit of presenting and a lot of listening. So what we want to do tonight is we want to really hear about what people see as the future of the Scioto Peninsula and the future, what you all see as the future of the Scioto Peninsula and the future of Franklinton. I think on a night like tonight, we have to start first by recognizing that we owe a debt of thanks to people who saw the great wisdom in putting up a Franklinton flood wall. Because if we had been here without the flood wall, I'm not sure how deep it would have been. But we're blessed by having had a lot of investments made in this neighborhood, and a lot of investments made that put us in a position to really look at what the future can be. So we've made investments in the flood wall 20 years ago. We've been making investments with our partners at CDDC in things like the Veterans Memorial Museum, in things like the Scioto Mile, in things like the amount of infrastructure that we're putting in place in terms of roads and sewers and fiber optic infrastructure. What we have the opportunity to do is create a transition between downtown, our cultural district, and the great unique neighborhood that is and has always been and will continue to grow into something new that is Franklinton. And we want to talk that through with you all tonight. So we have representatives here tonight that are going to walk us through what our initial vision is, what our initial idea of what it could be is. We have a very aggressive vision of the potential. I don't know that aggressive vision of potential is what will be realized, but we had to start somewhere. So what we've done is we put out a plan that we're going to review with you tonight to explain what the potential is, and we want to get your reactions to that. We want to understand what people's vision is. Let me start a little bit about where the process is going to go from here. So tonight, we're having this session to listen, to explain, and then listen to the community. We are recording this so that developers who are interested in developing the Scioto Peninsula have the opportunity to hear from you and see what your reactions are, and incorporate that into their proposals. We have CDDC, our partners at CDDC, along with the city, have issued a request for qualifications to developers to look at developing essentially everything this side of where they're building the parking garage. We'll go over the details of what that really means, and you'll see it, but just to give you a sense of perspective, developing that breadth of property. So we've issued an RFQ. The next step is we'll get responses back I'm looking at on March 27th from interested development teams. We'll work together, we at the city will work together with CDDC to narrow that list down to probably 3 development teams that we will then go into a second phase where we will invite them to submit specific proposals for how they would develop the land. Throughout this process, we want to make sure that we understand what everybody's vision for what this could be is. So a couple pieces of housekeeping. I'm going to first introduce Guy Worley, and then Graham White is going to explain a little bit more about our detailed proposal. I should have started out with an introduction of myself. For those of you who don't know, I'm Steve Shoney. I'm the development director for the city. I have responsibility for city policy on business development, housing, code enforcement, planning and land redevelopment along with a couple of other parts of my portfolio. I will be part of the review team that looks at the proposals that come in, so I'm personally very interested in hearing what everybody has to say. With that, I again want to thank everybody for taking the time to come out. I want to keep my comments short. I'm going to turn it over to Guy, but really the meat of tonight will be getting Graham the opportunity to explain to you what this might be and what his team's initial vision really means, and get your reactions to that. So, Guy?
Thank you, Steve. So I was thinking back to 2013. We actually had a meeting very similar to this over in Cosi to talk about the initial planning for the Scioto Peninsula. And since that time, I mean, we got a lot of input, and since that time, we've actually made a lot of progress. So I'm going to kind of give you an update on what we've been doing since 2013, because quite a bit has been accomplished. And then we're going to ask Graham Wyatt to basically give you an overview about the second phase of this effort. And so where we're going to start is, this is our new riverfront. I don't know if you all remember 3 years ago, but this is what our river used to look like. And what we heard was that from the community was, make our river an amenity. And if you recall, our river was literally 4 inches deep on the edges, about 4 feet deep in the middle. We had a dam just south of Main Street. And over 100 years, the Scioto River really became a sedimentation pond. It didn't flow, it smelled, it certainly wasn't an amenity. So one of the things that we heard was, let's make our river an amenity. So what we did was, we removed the Lowhead Dam south of the Main Street, and we redug the channel. We brought the river back to its original course, and we basically added 33 new acres of green space. New bike paths that connect the Olentangy bike path to the north, the Scioto Audubon bike path to the south, and really created a front door for the lands west of the river, the Scioto Peninsula, into Franklinton. We've learned that green space is a huge catalyst for development. CDDC, putting together public-private partnerships, we redeveloped the old city center site into what's known as Columbus Commons today. We put together a public-private partnership to build the Scioto Mile Park. In between those two green spaces, about $400+ million worth of new development has occurred, which used to be nothing but abandoned buildings that were boarded up and empty parking lots. Now that 25-block area south of the State House to the courthouse, from 3rd Street to the river, it's frankly just about built out. So green space is a catalyst for redevelopment. We studied other cities, but now we have 2 good examples in our own city. And here we're adding 33 acres of green space, and we think that'll be a catalyst for the development of this area. One of the things that we wanted to do, and we heard was at that public meeting, was you need to activate the river. Now our river flows again. It enables, by allowing it to flow, it cleans itself. We have folks actually paddleboarding, walking, running, biking, canoeing, kayaking out in the river now. So now our river is actually a plus instead of a minus, and it's been well received. So we basically listened and we presented a plan, and the plan that we came up with was, let's create a cultural mixed-use destination for the Midwest. If you think of Chicago, you think of the Cultural Mile, where they've got the Shedd Aquarium, they've got the museum, the art museum, they got Millennium Park, the Center of Science and Industry. We can create our own cultural mixed-use destination right here in Columbus. 47% of the U.S. population lives within an 8-hour drive. I think we're much more affordable than Chicago. Why couldn't we have our own cultural amenities? So what we have been going about building is, we completed the Scioto Greenways project. in November of 2015. And we started building a new project where the old Veterans Memorial was. And we basically are building a new National Veterans Memorial and Museum. In addition to that, we're adding to an amenity that's already one of the best in the country, and that's our Center of Science and Industry. So we're going to add a new cultural amenity in the southern part of COSI. We're partnering with the American Museum of Natural History out in New York. We're building a new underground parking garage at the front door of COSI and going to build a park. And then we have one space south of COSI that we're going to leave for a future public cultural amenity. I don't know what that is at this point in time, but we want it to be a public use because it's on the riverfront. And so the plan was to have cultural amenities on the riverfront, and then to the west of Bell Street, create a mixed-use development. So a little bit about this project. So we basically broke ground in December of 2015, and Senator John Glenn led an effort with veterans from around the state that we ought to create a true Veterans Memorial. We had a Veterans Memorial that was the convention center. Built in 1954, we built a new convention center, and we're expanding the current convention center. And so we were asked to take a look at that site, and we decided, let's build a true Veterans Memorial that would really, truly honor our veterans and educate our young people about what honor, duty, country means and why we enjoy the freedoms that we have today. It's due to the sacrifices that our veterans have made on our behalf. This idea kept growing. It started out as something to honor our 900,000 veterans, but as we kept listening to veterans and listening to school teachers and school superintendents, we learned this idea could be a lot bigger. And so as it turns out, the idea has grown into, let's create the nation's Veterans Memorial and Museum. There isn't one museum that truly tells the story of all veterans in all conflicts. And as it turns out, there's 22 million veterans in America. As it turns out, they have about 190 annual meetings, these veterans organizations. We'd like this to be the center of the universe for those type of meetings. Come and visit this. So we started this project. This project will be the iconic building along our riverfront. And it will be completed and opened July of 2018. So we're about 16 months away from completing it. This is what it looks like from an aerial view. You can see the construction. You see the riverfront there. It's going to be a beautiful vantage point of our city. It should be totally enclosed later this summer. And this is what it looks like from across the river today. It's just going to get better and better as it continues. Another thing that when we were listening about what cultural amenities could we add, one of the things we don't have as a city is we don't have a natural history museum in our city. We have one of the best centers of science and industry in the country. Why couldn't we have a natural history museum? So what we did was we went to New York City and we recruited the American Museum of Natural History, which is the premier natural history museum in the world. And we asked them to create a satellite and bring their first satellite to our city. And we announced this past September, and this project will be finished this November. And so it'll be open this November, and that'll be a great addition to the peninsula, to this neighborhood, and to our whole city. So it's under construction right now. We've got folks from COSI here. Apologize for the dust and the noise, but it's going to be finished soon and open. And then we basically wanted to connect these cultural amenities up. And so in order to do so, if you recall, there was a big parking lot there. It really wasn't something that was going to add to a world-class cultural mixed-use development. So what we've done is our partners with the city and CDDC, we put together a plan to basically build a new underground garage. So it's going to be a 2-level underground garage. with a new park, which will be the frontage for this new mixed-use development that Graham's going to share with you later. This project's under construction now as well, and it basically will be completed this November as well. So, in a nutshell, the project that and the plan that we presented back in 2013, we've been going about executing it. It's not just a plan. And for those, I know there are a few folks that have been around this neighborhood for a long time. I see my friend Dewey Stokes in the audience. And, you know, this land that we've been discussing, this 56 acres, has been planned 8 times since 1908. And there's not a lot here. And so this is a plan that we are executing and we're going to be able to complete. So those were the cultural amenities that we discussed, and now what I want to do is introduce Graham Wyatt. CDDC basically engaged one of the world's best architectural urban planning firms, Robert A.M. Stern out of New York. And Graham Wyatt has done a lot of development and planning there, but also around the globe. And he's also done a lot of planning here in our own city, up at Ohio State and New Albany and other places in our own community. So he knows our community well. So with that, I want to introduce Graham, who will basically give you an overview of this mixed-use plan. And before I do that, I want to say how we armed him with information on what could this be. Having a plan that can't be executed, it's not worth doing. You see we're executing the cultural side. So what we did is we went and hired a consulting firm to do a market/demand study. And we hired a firm called Hunden Strategies, and they're a national firm, and they basically interviewed all the realtors, all the brokers, all the developers in our region. They met with Morpsey to look at our population trends. Fortunate for our city, our population continues to increase at a very rapid clip. They met with our experienced Columbus team, who markets our city from a convention and tourism perspective. And here are the data points that they gave us. Basically that downtown housing is at 100% occupancy. There aren't any available units right now. An example is we've just recruited a new CEO to our city from Philadelphia to be the CEO of COSI. It took him a while to find a 1-bedroom unit. That's how the demand is so strong. So housing's at 100% occupancy in downtown. Office is at 90% occupancy downtown. So there's a strong demand. Our population continues to increase. Folks want to live, work, and play in this downtown environment. And so with those data points, then we asked Graham and his team, how would you be able to put all those units on this peninsula? And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Graham, and Graham's going to give you an overview of the plan.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Guy. Yeah, it's great to be here, and as Guy said, I've spent a fair amount of time in Columbus over the last decade, and I feel as an outsider I've come to know it pretty well. But part of the reason I'm excited about being with all of you tonight is you all live here and know it so much better than I do. So I'm looking forward to learning the lessons that I can learn from people who really only know the place as a resident can. What I can tell you, though, that maybe you're not so aware of, because you are residents here, is the attention that Columbus is getting nationally and internationally as an example of successful downtown redevelopment. And there is certainly a trend in North America in general that cities are reviving and people are wanting to live in cities again, and I, for one, think that that's a very good thing for a lot of reasons. But Columbus is a poster child for that. And it's very exciting to be involved in this project, because this project, in my mind, done successfully, is only one more step in demonstrating that Columbus really knows how to do it. So thank you, Guy and CDDC, for letting me and my team be involved in it. I am certainly not the kind of designer who will come into an urban design project and say, well, I've got some idea, or this is how it's done somewhere else. I tend to pride myself on really trying to dig in and do the research and learn the history of the place and get a feeling for what the local scene is about. And so I'm hoping very much that that is reflected in what I'll be showing you in a moment. I also do take very seriously the fact that real estate development and urban redevelopment has to be based on the reality of what the market demands. And so I think it's very commendable that Guy and CDDC have produced quite a detailed market analysis. I will say there's one part of the market analysis which I think fell short, and I teased Guy about this a little bit. I said, how can you possibly know what the residential absorption rate is in downtown Columbus if you're 100% occupied? You clearly haven't reached it yet. So I think it is a great thing for Columbus that so many people are wanting to live downtown and are returning downtown, and if we can get more people in Center City, that's only for the best. So armed with that information, here in a snapshot is an illustrative plan that my team and I produced for what might happen on the Scioto Peninsula. And to orient people, first there is the extraordinary riverfront park. I mean, that is such a great success story, opening up the river and creating 33 acres of park. And that wraps all the way around the peninsula and is a huge asset which will benefit any future development. There is, of course, the other type of park, which is adjacent to COSI and to this new development, and is located right at the center of the peninsula, and it will have quite a different character along the riverfront, maybe a bit more picturesque and relaxed and following the natural lay of the land, and in front of COSI, a bit more formal and urban in its character. Then there are the cultural institutions. 2 out of 3 are there already, although COSI continues to evolve, I think, in a very healthy way. I think it's good that these changes are taking place. And as Guy pointed out, you still have an opportunity here on the Scioto Peninsula for yet another cultural institution. And I do think that that's a good thing that that site is available, because given what's happening commercially in downtown Columbus, there certainly should be an opportunity for another significant cultural venue in the future. I also take very seriously the physical constraints that exist already on a site, and I think that those sorts of constraints can really help urban designers to be more productive and more effective in their work and not less. One of those constraints is the existing streets that run through the site and connect it from downtown on the one side and under the rail viaduct and into the Franklinton community on the other side. So Broad Street to the north and Town Street to the south. There are also, I mentioned the rail viaduct, there are a variety of connections, not just Broad and Town Street, which penetrate underneath the rail viaduct and connect this development site, which totals about 21 acres, with Franklinton on the other side. And it does seem to me that all of those are very important and should be maintained, and there are certain things that can be done to actually improve them and make them safer and more attractive. So the plan proposes to maintain those connections and to do whatever it can to foster active connection between Franklinton on one side of the rail line and this Scioto Peninsula development on the other side. There are 2 existing streets that run north-south on the Scioto Peninsula. One of them is Bell Street, and the other is Starling, and they have fairly significant value. Not so much value because they're streets above grade. They're not in great shape, and it doesn't cost a huge amount of money to replace the paving, but really the value below grade, because there are utilities that exist there from a time when this site was much more developed. So it doesn't make sense to us, to me, to throw that out and start over again. Let's say that that is a valuable asset. Let's spend the money where it counts and to keep those streets. I also think it's important to keep those streets because they represent a scale of urban block which is characteristic of Center City Columbus. And Columbus has this pattern of blocks roughly 200 feet on a side, and many neighborhoods with an alleyway running through the middle. And that seems to work very well for this city and for other cities. So there was no reason in my mind to throw out the good asset that's there already. So we're assuming that Bell Street and Starling Street would remain. What is missing, though, is the intermediate street, which once existed. And in fairness, it wasn't so much a street as an alleyway, but it was there historically and has now disappeared. But it did seem to me and my team that if one is to redevelop this portion of Center City, Columbus, with the 3.1 million square feet of development, which the market study suggested, that that's a lot of development, and that it ought to have, as a community on its own, I said, a main street. Where's the main street for this new community? Well, the truth is there was once a street there, and so the plan is reinstituting it. And also, it's the end of the Main Street Bridge. So the way I like to think about it, it isn't just a new Main Street, it's actually connecting and extending Main Street, which exists across the river. And finally, at the north end of that, there is a potential for an important connection, and we're thinking about this as a pedestrian connection, not a vehicular connection, from the Scioto Peninsula across to the Arena District. And I know that this, many of you are probably familiar with it, that this plan has been proposed in the past. It is part of my research. It did seem to me that it made a lot of sense, and particularly what's happening in that portion of Columbus across the river and the more or less full build out of the Arena District. It would be very nice to have a bicycle connection and a pedestrian connection that leads directly across. The main street itself, it seemed to me, would be much more effective if it had a series of public open spaces along it. But I've said already that there are major public open spaces on the Scioto Peninsula, big parks of a city scale. So it doesn't make sense to do more of those. What really, in my mind, would improve this development is having small, densely designed, energetic urban spaces, something more in the way of a plaza or a small town square that punctuate the street. And so those are shown here in the sort of rose color, one at the north end, one at the south end, and one in the middle, providing activity along the length of the main street. And the market study did suggest, notwithstanding the fact that retail in downtown Columbus is something that needs to continue to develop, that there is demand for a significant amount of retail in this location. And so our proposal is that the main street that runs from north to south in this new Scioto district would be lined with retail, and certainly retail which can serve the local community as it grows and evolves. Some people said, why not put the retail along the park? And I said, well, historically, single-sided retail on a street never really works well. And looking at the New York example, those of you who are familiar with Central Park, there is not retail on Fifth Avenue facing the park, and there is not retail on Central Park West facing the park. The retail is where it is double loaded, and I have photographs of it here, on both sides of the streets that are one block back from the park. So Columbus Avenue in the west or Madison Avenue in the east, those are the retail streets. So that is a valuable lesson that plays out in New York, but in many other cities, demonstrating why the appropriate location is to have it internal to the development, not at its periphery. We've also spent a lot of time thinking about what kind of street this might be, and there is a perennial problem, in my experience with urban redevelopment, that urban planners tend to think big is good and bigger is better. And that's actually often not the case. If you make streets wider and if you make parks too big, then people feel a little bit lost in them. And one of the things actually which is really successful about the Columbus block and the Columbus typical street size is that it is tight and truly urban. And so that is something we've looked at very carefully. Luckily, the existing pattern of Bell Street and Starling Street already heads us in the right direction. People are very familiar with European examples, that of course people go to Europe to walk on these streets because they have a certain character. One of the things that's important about them, though, that people often forget, is that many of these streets that people go and visit as tourists are attractive because they have a harmonious balance between vehicles and pedestrians, and that it isn't just pedestrians who are cowering on what is primarily a vehicular street, but there's an even balance between the two. So all three of these that happen to be European examples, actually, those are public streets where vehicles go through for service and collecting trash and emergency purposes, but they do it in a way which is sharing the public right-of-way with pedestrians, and we see the main street running through the center of the Scioto Peninsula as being of that type. There are also examples in the United States, again, going back to New York City, but there are examples here in Columbus and elsewhere. This is the meatpacking district, which was a kind of gritty urban industrial area, but now has become both residential and commercial. And in this situation, these streets are very much balanced between pedestrians and automobiles. And here you get a sense for the kind of character of those buildings, old, tough industrial buildings, which frankly are the buildings that used to exist on this site before the flood of 1913. This is the kind of character that once existed in the Scioto Peninsula. And here are new buildings, this is in the area of the meatpacking district, which pick up on that flavor, so new residential buildings, but relating to the industrial heritage of the area. Back again to the idea of streets. These are European streets, which when you look at them, look as though they're primarily pedestrian, but in fact are designed for automobiles. Along the length of the street, it did seem it was very important at its midpoint to have a connection back toward the park in front of COSI. And at that point, to have some central civic retail building. And so here we're looking, this is one of many examples of a market hall. It happens to be Covent Garden in London, but there are many communities where there are market halls of this type, which are public spaces where public events take place, but they also have a retail character to them, and they serve as punctuation at the center of a community. And also have open air spaces. None of this is heated, but even in the cool weather or the cold weather, because it's covered and it's somewhat protected, it becomes an attractive public gathering place. There are a series of streets that we've introduced, again, in keeping with the scale of the typical historical Columbus grid, which are narrower, only 50 feet from building face to building face, and those run both along the western side of the site and connect back to the park. And so here you get a feeling in a cross-section. Imagine you're cutting through the street, so the gray on either side is the height of the buildings, shops and residences on either side, and you can see that there's a pedestrian traffic way in the middle, but not too wide, and there's a sidewalk on either side and enough space for street trees and the like. And here is that slightly narrower 50-foot street. Again, very much in keeping with the scale of streets that many of you are probably familiar with from what you would consider to be the best historic neighborhoods in Columbus. Looking at a ground floor plan, this is color-coded according to the various uses, and the dominant color is this rose, a pink color, which is retail, making the point that the market study justifies quite a lot of retail along the central main street. At the second level, though, there are two very different uses, residential and office, and there seems to be considerable demand for both, as Guy mentioned a moment ago. The residential we have placed primarily on the side of the site which faces toward the river and faces toward the park, where people will benefit from views. And then the other side of Main Street, coded here in blue, would be office space, totaling almost 900,000 square feet of office, but it can be built out slowly in a series of buildings at a size which is reasonable for this community. Back against the rail tracks, which are elevated, is an ideal location for some parking, and also there would be parking internally within all of the residential buildings, concealed from the street, so it's not visible. So here you have an upper floor plan, the blue that runs, see if I can get the laser to work, blue running all the way along Main Street. At the second and third floors and above is office space in a variety of sizes that would suit the market, and everything which is shown here in the gold color is residential, which wraps around internally concealed parking garages. Finally, we are proposing, we hope, that there is demand for a hotel and that could be located toward the center of the peninsula. And finally, at the upper floors, the parking garages are only a few floors high, and on their tops would be landscaped gardens and roof decks, so the various residences that rise up above that would have the benefit of looking down on or actually having access to landscaped roofs. And here you see those various roof gardens, so there's not just landscape space at the street level, there is landscape space up above. And these are both examples of that type of space that can either provide public gardens for the units which are private gardens for the units that are immediately adjacent, or common gardens that are shared by all the residents of the building above. So finally, a few views of what this might look like. This is always a very dangerous thing for an urban designer to do, because what we want to do is to give a character, but not necessarily be prescriptive about the specifics. But this should give you a feeling of the scale of what's being proposed. Imagine here that you are hovering above downtown, looking across the town and Main Street bridges. Here you see COSI in the foreground and the National Veterans Memorial Museum on the far side, and you see the frontage of this new 21-acre development with a variety of buildings, but generally holding a height of about 85 feet, and a couple of taller towers, one on Broad Street and one here on Town, which rise up to 25 or even 30 stories if the market will support that. And here you can see in the background, fairly concealed, but the rail viaduct runs behind, and the Franklinton community immediately on the other side of that. A second view taken from the other direction. Imagine now you're in the air over Franklinton, which you see in the foreground. Here is the rail viaduct. This is the development with the two towers that mark the two main east-west streets, and it gives a feeling of the direct connection and the relative scale of this new development compared with Center City across the river. A view taken at ground level, as though you've crossed the Broad Street Bridge and are looking back toward this new development. This is across the large park, which has the currently under construction parking garage going in. This is Broad Street in the foreground, and here you can see the future development, including the market hall right at the middle. Standing on the front steps of COSI, this is the new landscape lawn and landscaping which will go on top of that underground parking garage. Straight ahead of you on axis is the market hall. Seen beyond it, office buildings, but in the foreground, residential buildings and the location of a possible hotel. And finally, and very importantly in my mind, the feeling and the scale at Main Street. Those buildings are 5 or 6 stories tall typically, although higher right at the midpoint of Main Street. The street is 60 feet from side to side, so it has that kind of tight urban quality that people associate with cities, and it will really, in my mind, go a long way to making sure that this does have a truly urban character that many new urban redevelopment projects do not have. I'm sorry, there was one more view. Here we are looking across that Main Street as it widens at its midpoint to the proposed market hall. So that's the presentation part, and I know that both Guy and Steve said, let's throw it open for comments and discussion. We're eager to hear what your thoughts are, and thank you very much for coming out on this damp evening. Steve?
So we got about half an hour for questions, and then after we do questions, we're going to go to some breakout sessions. We're going to have 3 easels around the room where we're going to ask you to answer some questions, give us some comments on some things, and we're going to record all that. To help with the questions, we do have a mic in the back of the room that I'm going to ask Ashley Sen or Mark Lundeen from our team to help get folks who raise their hands and want to ask questions the mic. We'll open it up for questions, and happy to take any and all in the time we have allotted. Okay, there's got to be somebody who has a question, because I've got like 10 that I can run through and try and answer in advance that will maybe inspire. Go ahead and ask your question. They're trying to get the mic figured out, and I'll just repeat it into my mic.
I see all the growth with more residential. What is supporting that residential besides just the central possible market area and the restaurants on there? Is there plan for something, convenience stores or specifically a grocery store in the area to help feed these people and get them the necessary needs to live down there?
So the question, and you spoke really well and loudly. I'm just repeating this so we get it recorded. The question is really, is there going to be the opportunity to have grocery stores, what we call provisioning? Can you get, can you get toilet paper and diapers? Kind of the basic things of life. We've built in, I think Graham's done a design that would incorporate that kind of space. It's really all going to depend on the market. One of the things that we talked about when we talked about this plan initially, and we've talked with Graham about it, is, as I look at it from the city development department, retail right now is really the most influx of any of our sectors of our economy, because when you look at how people are buying stuff, the fact that I could go get my phone and I could have toilet paper and diapers at my house in 2 hours, delivered to my front door, changes fundamentally how people think about retail. So whoever gets this project, and as they think about that retail street, they're really going to have to think very, very carefully about how much is the right amount of retail. I think Graham's done a great job of giving us a vision that says there's plenty of retail in here to incorporate this, as well as giving some space to help supply the markets both in Franklinton and frankly in downtown, if you will, downtown proper, however you want to refer to it. This is, by the way, technically, everything to the east of the tracks is within what the city officially designates as downtown. So if I get mixed up and I start talking about Peninsula, for those of you who care, that's why I keep doing that. So did that answer your question?
Kaufman's building a new development on Broad Street. Are we going to tie this in with this new development? I know they're going to be there first, and secondly, the bridges, the overpasses. To make that tie together, something's got to be done with those overpasses. And yes.
So a couple of thoughts on that. We're really excited about the Kaufman project going forward. Excited about having a groundbreaking hopefully coming up here in the next few weeks. From my perspective, and I think at one point I'll let Graham and Guy speak. It really is a great, I think it's going to be a great proof point for us to developers who are looking at this site. Because what he's doing is really a very, very mini version of the kind of mixed-use development we anticipate seeing here. I mean, he's got some retail, he's got 50,000 square feet of office, and he's got residential. His design, both designs, frankly, both his design and Casta's design to the south, I think both are designed in a way that will blend well, and it will give whoever the developer is two different things to react to along with what's already in the neighborhood. So that will be part of the task of the developer. Your other question was the underpasses or the trestles or whatever you want to call them. Yeah, I mean, it's a fundamental thing that's going to have to be dealt with. That's one of the things that as we get into the design factors, how do they deal with, first of all, some of it's just lighting and some basic safety things like that, but there needs to be some kind of an architectural and artistic treatment to that. One of the things that we're really going to challenge folks to think about is how do you make this the transition from the unique Franklinton to the unique Peninsula to the unique downtown. And those trestles and how that's treated is going to be really critical. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that. In the front here. Oh.
Dan Fertelman, urban designer for the city of Columbus. I really like the urban design plan, and I think it is critical that you that the land does get replatted to allow for the kind of the finer grain squares that you're proposing in your design. So it's just more of a comment than a question.
We planted a couple positive comments just in case it got.
Hi. How many residential units are you proposing? And of those residential units, are you thinking about provisions for affordable housing? And if you are, what do you consider affordable? Because we've been at these meetings for many years and still haven't heard numbers that are affordable for many of us. Thank you.
So, Guy, you want to deal with the numbers on the units, and I'll talk about affordability.
So the demand study indicated that we could build between 1,500 and 1,800 new residential units, majority of which would be rental, and 600,000 to 800,000 square feet of new office, 180,000 square feet of retail along the street, and up to 240 new hotel rooms, so 1 or 2 boutique hotels. We want this to be an 18-hour destination. If we just built the cultural amenities, museums generally close at 5 or 6 o'clock. So if this is going to be a true destination, you need that residential. We want office. It's good for economic development to have a strong office environment, and we do downtown, so we need more space for that. So that's basically the numbers for office, residential, retail, and hotel.
In terms of the affordability issue, if you'll let me kind of geek out for a second on affordability, there are a couple ways to define it. When we talk about a couple things, we talk about affordability in kind of the technical Department of Housing and Urban Development sense, which typically people are talking about housing being affordable to people making either 80 or 60% of what's called area median income, the median income for Franklin County and the surrounding areas. We also talk a lot about workforce income or workforce affordable housing, which we define as being affordable to define sort of definitionally middle income people making 100% of area median income. And I get that there are different levels of affordability and you have to talk about it. I think we haven't made a decision in terms of the degree to which we're going to be looking at mixed income within this development. It will be one of the factors in terms of how we evaluate the proposers. And have they done mixed income developments? What has been their level of success with mixed income developments? And do they have a plan for ensuring that this is not just another $2,500 for a 1-bedroom development, right? I mean, that's, we're seeing, there's some really nice places in Levesque where that's kind of what it's running. And that's fantastic. And the city needs that. The city needs some of that. The city also needs housing that is affordable for folks who are making middle income. The city also needs housing for folks who aren't making middle income. And for us, it comes down to a question of economics and what can we get done and really evaluating that as part of the overall proposal. It's high on the agenda for us, but I don't know enough to make a commitment to you to say, we're gonna have 10% of units that are affordable at X% of area median income. We're not there yet, but it's part of the evaluation for us.
Thanks, Steve. This is like my third Franklinton talk in the past 3 weeks, so I'm really excited. I can't get enough of it. I appreciate you guys putting this together. As the review board go through and plan on reviewing this, do you have, other than the urban aesthetics, the affordable housing, are there any like must-haves as far as infrastructure are concerned?
And let me just say one thing, and thanks for bringing up the review board. So as I said earlier, this is technically part of downtown, so this development will be reviewed by the Downtown Commission. It's part of their purview. However, look, it's not an accident that we have members of the East Franklinton Review Board and the Franklinton Area Commission here tonight, because we get that connection. We get that this is as much, if not more, a part of Franklinton from a neighborhood standpoint as it is from downtown. So use your intro to say that. In terms of other key things, for us at the city, and I'll let Guy, again, eventually I'll give other people a chance to talk. For us at the city, having a significant portion of office is really important. We think it adds to that. I think Guy's comment about it being an 18-hour neighborhood, that is fundamental to what we want to do. I think you're seeing that, frankly, on the other side of the tracks with what we have going on with the great things at the Idea Foundry and at 400 West Rich. That has become an 18-hour neighborhood just in that little section there, and we want to do more of that. So I think having the office, a significant portion of office, having significant residential, and having it be pretty darn dense. I'm not going to shy away from that. This city needs more of that. That is sustainable. Dense development is sustainable development. And dense development is how we get to things like having a sustainable transportation system. I know that scares some people. This is an environment where if we can do it, we can do it. If it can be done anywhere in this city, this is the place we should be able to do it. So I hope that answers a little bit of your question. I don't know if either of you have other comments to that.
All behind the density. I agree.
Okay. With Graham here, I feel like I'm like doing a master's thesis oral exam or something. So I'm always worried about Graham's opinion on this. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Colin Morlock. I live in the neighborhood. I was one of those people who bought 120% area median income affordable housing through the FDA, so thank you for that. Just to piggyback on the infrastructure question, my wife and I love what's happening on Broad Street. It's almost comically short a section of Broad Street. Please continue that westward. And we're very excited about the plan overall and love the idea of the pedestrian bridge connecting to the Arena District. So we're excited about this, but please, the rest of Broad Street really needs some attention. And with Kaufman and with NRI owning buyers, and there's going to be an opportunity for that, I would hope. So. Yeah,
Broad Street Broad Street's a really interesting street to deal with because it is, look, we need to get people in and out of downtown. And though I rail against cars fairly frequently, they are not fundamentally evil. They do serve a purpose in a very utilitarian sense, and we need to move them in and out of downtown. But there are ways that we can do a better job of making Broad Street more pedestrian friendly. I think getting things like Kaufman going will help, and it'll help force some of that slowing of stuff. So thanks for the question. Mr. Stokes?
Just a question, maybe in a couple parts. You haven't spoken about the railroad tracks and the extension of the tracks in back of us. They'll remain here, I would think. My purpose of that question is that I think it would be a people mover for the future as we see how the Short North got strangled with parking and maybe even German Village. This could be a people mover in the future because of the way these tracks are laid. I don't know if many in the room realize these tracks go through Westerville, Worthington, Hilliard, Dublin, all the way down to Rickenbacker. So I would like to see it maintained, and of course, the revitalization of this building as a people mover depot would be probably a plus too.
Yeah, and part of the reason we get excited about this site as a development location for office is when you look at the ability to build, whether it's rail, whether it's just next generation mass transit on roads, whatever it is, this area will be at the epicenter of how we move people, just simply because of its location. And so whether it's using the rail lines or whether it's using Broad Street in a different way, however it is we do it, using the great pedestrian and bike trails that we have. That's part of why we're excited about it.
Hi. So first, I want to say I think the plan looks great, and kind of regardless of what it ends up looking like overall, we know that it's going to be a benefit both to the city and the greater community. My question to you is, to what degree are you anticipating that this affects the community both in East Franklinton, but more so the community of West Franklinton, where we are seeing rents rise rapidly, home prices escalate at a rate that really is somewhat uncontrollable for current residents. So what's the idea that this development, how will this development affect the affordability and the character of West Franklinton?
The really short answer is I don't know. I can argue it both ways. This is the disadvantage of having been an economics major in college. I can give you whatever argument you want out of it. I think in some ways it will increase demand because it'll add to the greatness of this place. Okay, and increasing demand is going to raise price. But on the other hand, it's going to be a huge addition of supply. So I don't know how that's going to balance out. The one thing the economics majors do understand is that supply and demand do this, and you got to figure out where the price is. I don't know how those are going to move. I think that's going to be something we're going to have to be really careful about. It has the opportunity to, whether it's this neighborhood or it's the Near East Side or it's Milo Grogan or it's Linden. I mean, or any of the other neighborhoods that we've worked on in the city. We get that you got to find a way to raise a neighborhood up, but make sure that the people who have been there have made the neighborhood, help make the neighborhood great for years and years and years, still feel like it's home, right? And still have a home in that neighborhood. And it's going to be a challenge. It's going to have to be something we look at. Do I know which way it's going to go? I suspect that it will add to some of the price pressure, but I think it's a different kind of product. My hope is that what having this product here and having the amenities here will do is it will help Franklinton become more of a family neighborhood again. That's my hope, and I think that's the great work that Guy has been doing for years on building the cultural side of this. I think that has an opportunity to really add to the family nature of this, and so that if you want to be raising a family in this neighborhood, not only do you have great housing stock that you can rely on, but then you have great amenities down here that you don't have today that makes it harder to raise a family. You don't have the food access. You don't have those kinds of things in the neighborhood right now. What else?
Good evening.
Good evening.
And I've been a senior resident. Hi, Guy. I wanted to just add to the comment that the gentleman had mentioned about convenience stores. That needs to be a part of retail, but I just got back from Chicago, and I'm noticing that some of the big box stores now have what they consider urban footprints. They're very creative. They don't take up as much room, and it'll make us look more hipper than we are. So I think as we develop, there will be opportunities to bring those kinds of innovation and buildings to this project. The other question I had, I noticed that we have the 2 residential towers, and they're relatively high compared to the rest of the area. Is that because those are the only areas designated for residential, so they have to be that tall and that many, or are there other opportunities as we continue to be successful and we grow?
I'm going to take issue with one thing you said, and then I'm going to turn it over to Graham. We're plenty hip. I mean, it's not that we need to look any, other than me, we're plenty hip in this town, so I don't think we need to worry about that aspect of it, but I'll turn it over to Graham to answer the other questions.
About the towers, can people hear from this microphone? I want to make sure. Yeah. So the location of those towers in the plan, that is not rigidly prescribed. In fact, the design that I showed to you is a guideline which is to serve as the basis of negotiations with the developer. It's always a very good idea as you're going into this kind of negotiation to have a basis you can work from, so that if somebody has a different idea, you can say, well, let's compare and contrast and talk about why you think your suggestion is better. If somebody comes back and says, well, we really don't think that the towers make sense, that's something that could be discussed. If somebody comes back and says it could be on another site, I think that's also valid to be discussed. I will say one of the benefits that I didn't mention in the presentation of those two sites is that the block just south of town and the block just north of Broad are slightly bigger than the typical blocks, and that allows them to accommodate more parking without having big visible parking decks. And if you have a bigger building which is taller, it needs to have more parking that goes with it. So there was actually that very practical justification for why those two towers in those locations made sense. But is it prescribed? Absolutely not.
You mentioned earlier the aspect of sustainability and the use of green space. I'm wondering, are there any incentives the city is thinking about providing for both business and commercial and residential developers in terms of green building stock and increasing the green building stock of the city here? My second question is, are you in any way trying to, or at least planning to, engage with the artistic community of Franklinton, such as the Vanderelli Room or 400 West Rich, in the creation of not just, you know, these sleek glass steel buildings, but some of the murals that we're seeing in some of the smaller parts of town? Are you trying to bring that in, or is it somewhat separate to that?
In terms of green building, we actually have some programs now that Mark could tell you a lot more about in terms of our Green Columbus program, which is part program to help redevelop brownfield sites and put those sites back into use. It also helps pay for green building assessments and those kinds of things. We have also our energy support, our ESID, Energy Special Improvement District program, which helps with building retrofits and things like that. So we've got some things that we're doing. We're also actually right now engaged in an overall study of our incentive programs to see what we can do to encourage businesses to do things like have transit programs for their employees rather than just free parking. And doing those kinds of things. So we're engaged in that. As it relates to engaging with the artist community, I'll just be blunt and a little crass about it. I think hopefully we're going to hire a developer who's smart enough to figure that out, because they'd be pretty stupid not to. And that is going to be key. I think it will be a huge missed opportunity if we don't, because I think you just have to walk 100 steps to see what that can be over in Franklinton. And I think that's going to be, when I talk about how we think about the treatment of the trellises, that's an obvious place to incorporate that and see that transitioning. And then how do you bring that beyond just the transition points and into the development is going to be something that I'll get really excited about talking to developers about and saying, and encouraging them to do that outreach. That said, it's going to be somewhat up to the developers, because it's going to be really their grand vision to implement, but we can kind of lead them in that direction. And I think the opportunities and the assets there are so fantastic that I can't imagine they won't be used. Either you got it, yeah.
On the sustainability topic, in the design guidelines that went to the developers that accompanied what I showed you on the screen, there is the written recommendation that every building within the development seek LEED certification. It's not a requirement. We actually debated that. Should we require it of everyone? But we made that strong recommendation. I know that LEED is not the only measure of sustainability, but I think just the fact that we and CDDC and the City of Columbus put that in an RFQ document that is going to developers around the United States is a pretty strong commitment.
So, do you have a question? No, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Erin. I live in Franklinton, and I really love this plan. It looks dense, which I'm excited about, and I'm excited about the cultural institutions, and I'm going to be the third person to bring up affordable housing, because I think that this is something that Franklinton residents are actually very concerned about. I know a lot of people in Franklinton are very concerned about. Everyone is talking about maintaining affordable housing in Franklinton. And I think that incorporating affordable housing in this plan is very important for the neighborhood to maintain its flavor and let the people who live there continue living there. So I just want to, I don't think I'm belaboring the point because this is such a concern for Franklinton residents. Thank you.
There's a couple questions that haven't been asked that I'm going to go ahead and address because I know somebody's probably out there thinking about them. The major civic building site that was showed up there. There is not anything on the drawing board. There's not anything that we have planned. There's no kind of, there's a Donald Trump joke to make here that I won't even try and make. There's not any conspiracy out there to kind of get this, to get something there. It's just, we know, and again, I give Guy and his team at CDDC a lot of credit for thinking this through. We know that someday something great will come along that the city wants to do. And this is an important enough part of our city that we want to reserve a place for that, for when that next great thing comes along. So that's that. Graham talked about the pedestrian bridge. We think it's a really great idea. We think it'll probably happen at some point when, I don't know, will it be exactly there? I don't know. But it's something we've had kind of in plan after plan after plan that we'll try and work toward. And then I see some of our friends from the Division of Police in the back. I'm assuming they're not here as protection for me. At some point, there will be a new substation. Whether it's incorporated into this or whether we find a new location for it, we don't know yet. We've been talking to folks at DPS about kind of where that goes. But, you know, at some point we're going to get you guys some new and better space, and we'll make sure there's plenty of room to park the cars and security and all that stuff. So we're working through all that stuff. I figured that's why a couple of you guys were here anyway. So, and I hope that was okay, because if not, I expect I'll get a ticket pulling out of here or something. So, did you have another question? Okay, and then right behind her after that.
I'm going to piggyback on Jeff Mormon's question about development in West Franklinton and echo the opinions of many community leaders and business leaders in Franklinton in hoping that the development and particularly the businesses that come in work with the existing neighborhood. I'm really excited about the retail especially because it seems like a great opportunity to hopefully incentivize businesses to hire local Franklinton residents, which would go a long way in helping people stay in their homes. So is Trent Smith here? Yeah, I'm sure you're already excited about that opportunity as well. Great. That's all.
Thanks. I think we got one more, and then probably got time for one more after that if anybody else has a question. Yeah.
I don't know if this is starting to come into your planning in this kind of a stage, but I see all this green space, and then you're going to put this huge pile of concrete on top of it. How do you plan to handle runoff and preventing it from like going into the river? We've got, you know, we're going to have a lot more cars coming through. You're going to have you want to put 1,800 homes in there. There's a lot of people. That's a lot of stuff and runoff. You spend all this money on the river, and if we put it all back in, we sort of get the river back to pre.
My two people who probably know more about stormwater runoff and how to deal with it than me. Essentially what you do is you put underground detention basins in the development and then you release it slowly. There are ways to deal with that constantly. We've got a very tight stormwater manual. Our friends with the US EPA have Columbus on a very tight set of standards. Our Department of Utilities is responsible for monitoring that. Part of the reason we're spending so much money putting infrastructure in under the streets right now is to deal with all that. So we'll have new sanitary sewer, new storm sewer, all of that in there. And I think Graham showed a vision that has internal stormwater systems, the green roofs, all of that stormwater mitigation it's not an accident, and any developer is going to look at this site and recognize those things and recognize the benefits of the vision that Graham put out there in terms of managing that, so that there's not as much concrete on top. The surface area isn't as much concrete. It's getting that kind of green space in there. Did I do okay on that, Mark? Okay.
Last one.
Chris? All right.
Steve, Christopher Celeste. We're active over in the Idea Foundry and the renovation project over there. I wanted to commend you on building a plan and to be executed versus one of the 8 that hasn't. And I think, you know, if you can move a river to create 33 acres of green space, we shouldn't set our sights low for what happens next year. But I also, as a complete newcomer to the Franklinton neighborhood, think it's vitally important that we think about what the connection points are. And I just would call to attention publicly, as I have privately with Guy and others, that when we build garages at the back of a piece of property and tall towers, it gives the impression that that's the end of something instead of the beginning of something. For those of us in Franklinton who own property, who are investing, who have lived here, I think it's very important that the pedestrian connection points from this $500 million of money we spend bring people back and forth, not just cars, but people back and forth. And so we talk about the railroad tracks and kind of say, you know, well, we can do something with that. Artists and lights will solve that problem. I think that as part of this project, given the amount of time and money we will spend and it will take, we should think about that back side of this project as not being a fixed line, but a set of sort of fingers that reach into that first part of Franklinton and create a connection. Otherwise, I fear we'll create inadvertently a wall of sorts. And so all these images we see are very tight on the peninsula because it's that project. I think just thinking about how we just pull back slightly and think about those connection points will go a long, long way. And sitting right on the other side of the tracks, we're ready to reach out the other way and think about how to spend money and be creative to grab hands through this project. But I think that's something important that we begin to see in how the new developer comes to this project and takes what is a referential starting point, I know, Graham, and makes it into what it becomes ultimately. So thank you.
Go ahead. And then
I'd like to talk to that because I think that's such an important topic, and it's one of the reasons that one of the very first slides that I showed was calling attention to those connections, which are actually quite different in their character. And a couple of anecdotes related to them. I think that the idea of looking at those connections as they go a block or two back into Franklinton is really important. It should not just be what happens right where the viaduct is. One anecdote is the High Line in New York City, which so many people know, and they say, oh, it's such a great success story, and look what happens up on top. All the photographs you see are on top. The great success story in my mind that no one really thought about is what happened underneath, and it's totally transformed all of those sites underneath. And a lot of that had to do with simply going in and doing a really thorough job of cleaning it up and restoring the viaduct and putting a bit of lighting in. So that's one. I think there are interesting lessons to be learned there. Other is I was recently in Birmingham, Alabama, and they have a very wide rail line that goes right through the center of downtown because Birmingham was really founded as a rail transshipment point, much wider than what you have. And they've had an artists program which was actually primarily with lights. But it's extraordinary, and I was a little bit cynical before I saw it, and then I went and actually visited and experienced it. And on one side of the tracks is a community which is not unlike Franklinton. So I'm not saying that they've got an answer, but I think that that's another useful example to look at. I'm sure there are others that I'm not familiar with, but I think focusing a study just on all of those connection points in a unified way and how they go a block or two in either direction is a tremendously worthwhile thing to do.
I agree. Hopeful that this development will do is going to build on what's already happening in Franklinton. There's a lot of momentum in Franklinton already occurring right now. So I think both sides of the track, if you will complement and enhance one another. The pedestrian connections, I think, are critical because there's so much activity occurring already in East Franklinton. Restaurants, bars, the Idea Foundry, the new Casto Weiler development to the south, the Brett Kaufman development to the north, and further west. We want it to be coming, we want that development to come east. We're limited by those railroad tracks. We can't go any further west. The railroads, Dewey, are going to be here, and I had the opportunity to work with them on the side of Greenways project, and I know they're going to stay. So CSX and Norfolk and Southern are not going to move those railroad tracks. But we need to make it from a pedestrian, vehicular, bicycle-friendly area because a lot of great things are already happening in East Franklinton, and we just want to make sure this development complements, enhances that, and the momentum keeps coming. So we're working from the river west. East Franklinton is working east and west, and hopefully we can meet in the middle with this new mixed-use development. And it'd be a win-win.
Wyatt. What I want to do is we've got 3 easels stationed around the room. I think we have questions on each of the easels, right? And we're going to have a member of our team at each easel kind of leading a little discussion. I'd ask you to kind of move around the room, move to each of the easels, really try and kind of give us some of your feedback in a different way and in response to some of these questions. We do have a sign-up sheet on the table, which if you sign in there and give us your email, we'll get you updates on the process and help you stay informed. Let me, and we're not going to come back together. I'm not going to speak at the microphone anymore. But let me thank you all for, and not going to subject you to that. Let me thank you all for coming out. I do want to thank Graham and Guy for doing this. This is part of how we do development in Columbus. And it's a little bit different than a lot of other places. And I want to thank them for taking their time. And most of all, I want to thank you guys. So, Mark, do I need to give any other instructions? And there are also comment forms on the table over there if you just want to write out a comment. So thanks. Please go to the easels and help us out.